Good evening, everyone. Channel 5 has been living with the Metroplex for 40 years, and it's been quite a relationship.
And to prove it, we now open our video family album. You can watch it with us. It'll bring back a lot of memories.
Channel 5 began as the first television station in the Southwest, and it was the first television station south of St. Louis, east of Los Angeles, and west of Richmond, Virginia. Larry Estefa traces the roots of Channel 5.
Imitation is the sincerest form of television. Fred Allen, who made his name in radio, always got a laugh with that line. But in the early years of TV, there was nothing to imitate. It was all new, so those in the business had to innovate. And innovation quickly became the standard at WBAP-TV. It showed in the building itself. There really weren't any blueprints. After all, there were only 36 stations in the whole country, and none was designed specifically for TV. Until WBAP, it was a first. Firsts were important to Amon Carter, the millionaire Fort Worth business impresario. WBAP was his station. It would be built and run his way. So the station had a main studio big enough for the Budweiser wagon and its team of Clydesdales, though ironically, the station's very first broadcast wasn't even from the studio. It was a live remote. Harry Truman on a whistle-stop campaign for president in Fort Worth. It was September 27, 1948. WBAP-TV was born, 2 days premature, according to its FCC license. Amon Carter was its doting parent, encouraging each new step, investing his money and emotion. Just 6 years after going on the air, WBAP broadcast its first color program. Never mind that almost nobody owned a color TV. The next year, 1955, was one of WBAP's blackest. Amon Carter died on June 23rd. Ironically, the same day the station debuted color feature films. In 1 year, color was taking over. But television in those early days was colorful even when it was black and white. Because unlike any other business, television produced and sold a series of images. You couldn't touch them or package them, but you couldn't forget them either.
There are places I remember all my life, though some have changed, some forever, not for better, some are gone.
If it was a situation, if they cut them off and I never could have any more, then I would worry about it. They look shorter today. Do you wear them shorter? I wore them shorter than I used to. What's the reason for that, Amy? Well, I don't know.
Though I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before, I know
the job of president and vice president are not comparable in the degree of responsibility they bear. Nevertheless, he has played a more vital role than most vice presidents, with the exception perhaps of Vice President Garner of Texas. But
I know I'll often stop and think about them in my life.
Do you have any misgivings at all about going? Anything that's worrying you?
Well, I get a little twitchy sometimes, but I'm ready to go.
Bob Schieffer is part of the history of a news operation that made history. We accept news now as any station's signature, as the one thing that gives a channel number an identity. But that was always true at WBAP-TV, even when news was just one of a myriad of programs produced by the station. News was special. Remember, the incentive, not just to be the first, but best, came from a newspaperman, Amon Carter. The station was able to marry his tradition to a new technology. TV news had sound and motion. Now it needed a format. So it borrowed the newsreel from movie houses and sent it into your house. The Texas News was the first news program shot, edited, and reported entirely by WBAP's own staff. In 1948, that was revolutionary. The trend would eventually spread to the rest of the industry, but it started here. The Texas News routinely won national awards, and as a nightly newsreel, it was a fixture for 20 years. In the 20 years since, as we all know, the news has evolved into something much more high-tech, high-priced, high-profile.
And the Texas News is on the air.
Emotion, of course, is part of history, and old-timers point to 1974, the changing of the guard, the year WBAP became KXAS. No longer Amon Carter's station, but a part of the Lynn corporate conglomerate. Still, Channel 5's future then and now is just an extension of its past, linked to those pioneers of the fall of '48. Larry Estepa, Channel 5 News.
Channel 5 signed on with the call letters WBAP, which simply stood for We Bring a Program. The station has always been affiliated with NBC, but as late as 1957, we carried many ABC programs as well. During non-network hours, we aired locally produced and syndicated shows. Bill Kelly looks at some of the most memorable.
Channel 5 first aired the classic Superman series. And thanks to advanced publicity, our news camera and a good crowd of fans showed up at Love Field to greet the entire cast. Star George Reeves, who naturally looked like Clark Kent, had some difficulty convincing the youngest people he really was Superman. But these two guys know for sure. Another syndicated show was the Western Annie Oakley, starring Gail Davis. Gail was in town for the stock show and also visited our legendary Teenage Downbeat and host Tom Malarkey. Because these live programs were never meant to be rerun, there was no need to record them. That oversight, typical of all stations at the time, is why no Teenage Downbeat shows are known to exist, except for this short news film and one untypical videotape.
Well, I'll tell you very truthfully, Miss Howard, I'm sure I speak for all the men, that they're going to spend a great deal of time at the beach this summer. If this is any indication of what they have in store for them. And once again, we'd like to thank Wally Williams for furnishing the suits. And certainly we want to thank you, Miss Howard, and the Howard East School of Modeling for furnishing such beautiful girls. They truly look lovely. Let's have a nice hand for them, for all of them. They certainly are beautiful.
Teenage Downbeat was our own version of an expanded American bandstand, a place where stars could appear, perform, and promote a new record, a new movie, and even new fashions. Now we're going behind the scenes. One of our earliest programs for kids was Kitty's Playhouse, a daily 1-hour live broadcast. In these home movies, you can see the Playhouse set and the special magic carpet that flew the children to storybook land. Kitty's Playhouse became Kitty's Wonderland in 1955. Johnny Hay did drawings, puppets, and voices. Classic Warner Brothers cartoons were shown, birthdays celebrated, and another memorable character appeared.
Our friend the talking clock is here, and I think maybe he has something that he wants to tell you today. So suppose we open our ears and just listen to what the talking clock says. Listen. I listened very closely to you. And do you think you know what he said today? I know. Today our talking clock was telling us to share our toys. Share our toys, share our toys.
Bobby Peters' Jamboree was another early show for kids of all ages. Bobby was a band leader at the Hotel Texas and joined Channel 5 in 1950. He quickly became our first real personality with his Saturday program of comedy skits, music, and vaudeville routines. The kids loved him both on TV and at his personal appearances. But off camera, Bobby was heard to say, children should be seen, not had. Many of our early shows were weekly country music programs with mostly local talents. The Saturday night barn dance show was popular for years, and so were the Flying X Ranch Boys. None was recorded, but we did find the Buddy Starcher Show, a typical Channel 5 production, apparently made as a pilot episode.
Oh, that is all right. Run your fingers through my hair and a cuddle, little paddle, let me be. Oh, let it your teddy bear. And everything to gain when they call my name.
Along with our regular news and public affairs programming, we've produced thousands of hours of talk and information shows. The Charlie Rose Show lasted 2 years and was also seen on other stations around the country.
You'll recognize Ambassador George Bush, a man who wants to be president. Governor Reagan comes to you and he says, George, look,
the answer is no. Next question.
I want you to be my vice president.
The answer is no. I am in this right, keeping my sights set on this and this alone.
Today, as we have for over 15 years, Channel 5 continues hosting the Dallas-Fort Worth area Jerry Lewis Labor Day Telethon for muscular dystrophy. And the Children's Hour, it keeps on taping. For 25 years now, it's been a weekend fixture on Channel 5. First with Johnny Hay, then Bud Kneisel and I had a 2-year run. And for the last 18 years, it's just been me and the kids.
Hey, Josh, that was super.
The Texas News covered a wide variety of people and events. In 1953, 77-year-old J.C. Penney visited one of his Fort Worth department stores. 6 years later, Mrs. Minnie Baird, yes, that Mrs. Baird, celebrated her 90th birthday. And 29 years ago, a young whippersnapper of a reporter from KRLD Radio tried his luck in a milking contest. His name? Sam Donaldson.
It's not easy.
News. We've told thousands of stories, dramatic, alarming, emotional, entertaining. The sweep of history engulfs us all, and sometimes it hits close to home. Jane McGarry explains.
WBAP, Fort Worth, Dallas.
Say When, sponsored by Reynolds Metals and Sterling Drugs, will not be seen today in order that we may bring you the presidential breakfast direct from the grand ballroom of the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth.
We know that you don't wear a hat. We couldn't let you leave Fort Worth without providing you with some protection against the rain.
I'll put it on in the White House on Monday. If you'll come up there, you'll have a chance to see it there.
Two priests at the hospital say the president is dead.
The shots fired in Dallas on that November Friday reverberated around the world. They struck more than flesh and blood. They wounded the spirit of this country, and there are those who say we have never recovered. In any event, it probably was the biggest news story ever covered by Channel 5. Its sights and sounds and its controversies still echo in the concrete canyons of Dealey Plaza. But there were other stories and other sights. This area is no stranger to bullets and blood. In the early 50s, just as Channel 5 was struggling with a new, scary, difficult medium, the underworld of Dallas and Fort Worth carried on a feud that decimated the criminal hierarchy. Hollis DeLois Green was killed Chicago gang fashion outside a Dallas night spot on Christmas Eve, 1949. His funeral attracted a large turnout of prostitutes, safecrackers, and racketeers. Gambler Herbert Noble had survived so many attempts on his life that he was known as the Cat. In November 1949, a bomb destroyed his car, but it was his wife who was killed. On New Year's Eve the same year, a rifleman shot him in his Oak Cliff home, and he survived that. But the Cat ran out of lives in 1951 when a bomb exploded under his car near Grapevine. Gene Paul Norris, an underworld hitman, was shot to death by pursuing officers who chased him to a rural creek bank on Jacksboro Highway. When Norris died, most of the area's gangland killings ended.
One police flashed the flashlight, and the other got in a semi-kneeling position and fired the shot.
It clearly indicates that there's conflicting stories.
In Dallas, the resentment of decades of verbal and physical abuse broke out into the open with the shooting of Etta Collins. She was an elderly black woman shot to death by police as they investigated a prowler call. A series of shootings by Dallas officers brought cries for reform, demands for a tougher police review board, petitions to abolish the board altogether. The controversy brought down the administration of Police Chief Billy Prince.
Come to a point to where you feel like it's time to maybe let someone else get in the middle of it for a while.
So strong were feelings on both sides that it erupted into a verbal battle in the council chambers. A new chief, Mac Vines, brought new promise of sensitivity and goodwill. But all sides agree that racial tension flows uneasily beneath the outward calm of the city. The courtroom is the theater of reality, and in Channel 5's history, our cameras have captured much of the drama of legal conflict. In 1954, a Fort Worth jury convicted Hugh Brown of murdering his wife, but Brown passed sentence on himself. While our cameras watched, Brown slipped a cyanide capsule into his mouth, washed it down with a soft drink, and waited to die. In minutes, he went into convulsions and slipped into death. The trial of Candy Barr was a tragic comedy that was to change forever the relationship between the courts and the press. Judge Joe Brown permitted full camera coverage of the trial. Miss Barr was a widely known and highly publicized stripper who was assessed 15 years for possession of about an ounce of marijuana. But critics described the trial as a circus, and many Texas judges thereafter closed their proceedings to the camera and the recorder. Was Cullen Davis the man in black? His wife Priscilla said he was. She identified him as the man who killed her boyfriend and her daughter and wounded her and another person in a bloody night at the Davis Mansion in Fort Worth. But the woman who later was to be Davis's wife, Karen Master, said the multimillionaire was in her bed the night of the shooting. 2 juries failed to convict him of murder, and a 3rd jury acquitted him of charges he tried to have his divorce judge slain. But Davis's fortunes went downhill. He is still in bankruptcy court. Mark Reeves lived the good life. Expensive apartment, fast cars, lavish entertaining. His friends said he never talked much about his income. That's because Reeves robbed banks for a living. Over a span of years, he was the elusive, dapper bandit, always well-dressed, athletic, and thorough. But luck ran out for Reeves last May when he found himself surrounded by officers. Reeves shot himself. He survived to live in a wheelchair and to be sentenced to 10 life terms in prison. While Reeves was polished and professional, another would-be bandit failed at the game, but he provided our cameras several moments of stark drama. In 1983 in Dallas, parolee Alexander Davis of Fort Worth kidnapped the wife and 2 small children of Grand Avenue Bank president Joe Goyne. It was an attempt to extort money from the bank, but police spotted the car and surrounded it near the Dallas School District headquarters in East Dallas. Channel 5 cameras captured the story live as police persuaded Davis to release the children, then the woman. And finally, alone, Davis surrendered himself, still wearing the ski mask he had used in the kidnapping. Love Field was the crossroads of the nation. Anyone going from one coast to the other had to change planes midway in Dallas. But when Dallas dedicated a new terminal, the ceremony became a comedy of errors. A plane load of Hollywood celebrities was held up because the official scissors wouldn't cut the ribbon. The feature of the terminal was its moving sidewalks. A starlet promptly lost a shoe to the sidewalks, merely a preview of the hazards the sidewalks offered. Love Field was not without its tragedy. Early in Channel 5's life, in November of 1949, the crash of an American Airlines plane at Love Field took 26 lives. The feud that had long characterized relations between Fort Worth and Dallas was never better illustrated than in the construction of Greater Southwest Airport north of Arlington, also named Amon Carter Field. It languished and died for lack of support from Dallas. The arrival of jet travel provided non-stop coast-to-coast service, which ended the forced changeovers at Love Field. But it brought new problems of space and size. It took the federal government to push Fort Worth and Dallas into agreeing to build DFW Airport. It became one of the largest and busiest airports in the world, and one of the safest. But that aura of safety was shattered on a hot August Friday in 1985. Delta Flight 191 crashed as it approached a landing. 135 people died. Then just last August, Delta 1141 crashed in an aborted takeoff. Only 14 of the 108 on board were killed. Official causes of the crashes have not yet been announced.
All that I'm hoping and praying is that the white folks and the colored folks both retain their equilibrium.
One of the surprise stories covered by Channel 5 was basic acceptance of school desegregation in the Metroplex. Judges who ordered integration of schools pleaded for peaceful compliance, and for the most part they got it. Residents argued pro and con, but obeyed the law. The notable exception was at Mansfield, where, for the better part of a week, white protesters shouted defiance of a court order integrating schools. The demonstrations didn't end until a Texas Ranger was sent in to keep the peace. Later, Mansfield quietly integrated. Rosie the Riveter quietly went back to homemaking after World War II, but her daughters refused to stay home. The women's movement became one of the biggest running stories of the past 2 decades. The Supreme Court's famous Roe versus Wade decision originated from a Dallas suit and established a woman's right to an abortion. But that right has been continuously under attack from right-to-life forces. Almost daily were heard stories of women moving into a heretofore masculine world. That was especially true in politics and business, where women established themselves as shakers and movers. The hand that rocks the cradle may also rock the boardroom. Probably the most spectacular fire in Fort Worth history was the Carpenter Paper Company fire of September 1957. Its tall brick wall spilling into Lancaster Avenue was reminiscent of newsreel shots from the London Blitz.
It just blew up.
The paper company fire was only a dim memory when just down the street, disaster struck in March of 1986. Accumulated gas exploded at the old Frank Kent Cadillac Company. It rattled the city. 14 people, mostly passing motorists, were injured by flying glass. The Hilton Hotel across the street suffered structural damage. The defense industry has contributed in large measure to the Metroplex economy and Metroplex news coverage. Early in the F-16 program, a General Dynamics test pilot couldn't get the landing gear of the F-16 down, so he brought it in on its belly. A skillful job of flying and a spectacular picture for Channel 5. The F-16 went on to prove itself one of the best fighters in the world. And no one in Fort Worth can mention news stories without bringing up Pete the Python. Pete, actually a girl python, escaped the Forest Park Zoo in what looked suspiciously like a publicity stunt. In any event, Fort Worth took the python to its heart. While searchers beat the bushes for the giant snake, businesses staged Pete the Python sales, and fast food establishments offered Pete burgers. Just as mysteriously as he or she disappeared, the snake suddenly reappeared near the zoo and found a comfortable cage to rest up from its adventures. There literally are hundreds of stories that could have been included in this anniversary program. One early news promotion for Channel 5 said, "There are 1 million stories in our 2 great cities. We haven't covered them all, but we're working on it." And we still are.
Many people contributed to Channel 5 News over the years, among them the talented Alex Burton, who once co-hosted an innovative late-night news show with a plan. The solid anchoring skills of Charles Murphy lent much credibility to our news product. And Chip Moody, thanks to trick photography, seen here working with one of his favorite fellows, had a style and appeal all his own.
Poor Jeff Davis. Anonymous. Harold has been a television meteorologist longer than anyone in the Southwest, perhaps in the nation.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was void and without form. And the Lord said, "Let there be light," and there was light. For 4 decades, Channel 5 viewers have known about our commitment to weather and weather news. I came to this station in 1949, shortly after it went on the air. Throughout the years, we've brought the world of modern meteorology into your homes, describing North Texas' ever-changing conditions and offering our forecasts. It's been a memorable 40 years. The most destructive flood in Fort Worth history occurred when more than 10 inches of rain fell on the Trinity watershed on May the 16th and 17th, 1949. Floodwaters got into the city water supply, and many residents were without water for 3 days. The water reached the 2nd floor of the Montgomery Ward store on West 7th Street, and the store mannequins floated to the surface, and someone, I think they were high school boys, reported they were bodies. Fossil Creek was particularly troublesome in the early 60s. Following a 1964 storm, extensive work was done on the creek basin by the Corps of Engineers. Tornadoes are the most violent storms in nature, and Texas has more tornadoes than any other state in the Union. In 1957, a tornado hit the Dallas neighborhood of Oak Cliff. I was watching the skyline on that day and counted 7 separate funnel clouds. But folks in North Texas most recently remember the worst single tornado in state history, the Wichita Falls tornado of April the 10th, 1979. 42 people lost their lives. 1,700 were injured in this devastation. Now, when you're talking about ice, few Metroplex residents will forget the New Year's Day ice storm of 1979. For 3 days, the Dallas-Fort Worth area was virtually paralyzed. Dallas worse than Fort Worth. Many residents without utilities and groceries, some camping out in their living rooms next to the fireplaces for warmth. Severe winter storms are infrequent visitors here, but on occasion, our area is hit by ice or snow or both. Such was the case in the winter of 1983. During the last 2 weeks of that December, we had 295 consecutive hours of below freezing weather. It was a record. Texas is known as a state of extremes, from our short, cold winters to our long, hot summers. And the 1980 drought broke all heat records. Of Oklahoma weather, Will Rogers is reported to have said, "If you don't like the weather, wait a minute, it'll change." Of Texas weather, he could have said, "Walk across the road, it'll be different over there." With that challenge, there is probably no realm of interest that evokes more comment or is shrouded in more mystery than the weather.
2 days after our official sign-on, Channel 5 inaugurated local live sports programming with a football game between Amarillo and Pasco. The following day, we broadcast our first college football matchup, Arkansas versus TCU. Here's Scott Murray.
It's been a lot of good ones. And there'll be many more good ones. But I thank the Cowboys, and I'm retired.
Hard to believe it's been almost 10 years, but when Roger Staubach, one of the most revered sports figures in all of America, retired, he closed the book on a decade of professional sports success unparalleled in the history of North Texas.
He's going long. Down the near sideline for Pearson. Pearson makes the catch at the 5. Touchdown!
The Hail Mary pass, arguably the greatest moment in Cowboys history, but just one of many the Cowboys would be a part of in the 70s. It all began in '71 when Dallas won its first of 2 Super Bowl titles.
This is the start of a lot of good things to come. We're going to be back.
That was almost a dozen years to the day after Clint Murkison Jr. and Bedford Wynn became a part of the NFL family when the league awarded Dallas an NFL franchise. We were there to record the event upon their return. And how ironic that Tom Landry would soon become the first head coach of the Cowboys. For almost 10 years earlier, he was in Dallas as a member of the New York Giants to play in an exhibition game. Then 5 years later, he returned and was met at the airport by his wife, Alicia. As the Cowboys get ready to spend their last summer at Thousand Oaks, California, it seems like centuries ago that they spent their first training camp at Forest Grove, Oregon. How times have changed. Then a decade later, the Cowboys would leave the Cotton Bowl and take up permanent residence at Texas Stadium, the arena known nationally as the place with the hole in the roof, where the cheerleaders were born and great comebacks engineered. Our cameras were there to catch it all.
Staubach throwing in the end zone. Cody Hill! Touchdown! Cody Hill!
The 80s have not been nearly as kind as the 70s. One of the most memorable catches in Cowboys history turned in by the opposition. January of '82, NFC Championship game in San Francisco. Montana to Clark, the catch. And a trip to a record 6 Super Bowl for the Cowboys snatched away in the closing seconds. Dallas has never really recovered from that. And now 8 years later, a new regime with new ideas will try and build a new winner as a new era in Cowboys football unfolds. Baseball was one of the first sports we covered. Many a major leaguer spent time in the minor leagues with teams like the Dallas Eagles and the storied Fort Worth Cats. But Arlington's Tom Vandergriff was most responsible for bringing the majors to Texas and the Rangers to Arlington. Prior to the arrival of Major League Baseball, Hall of Famer Mickey Mantle brought a slice of the big time to Dallas when he opened a bowling alley back in the late 50s. Our cameras were on hand to catch teammates Whitey Ford, Billy Martin, and Yogi Berra lending their support. Then finally in 1972, the Metroplex came of age, and Major League Baseball arrived. Opening night was a festive occasion, and we were there. Ted Williams managing the team in its charter season. Rangers lost 100 games in '72, but baseball was here to stay. And it wasn't long thereafter that professional basketball followed. Our lenses started leaping when round ball arrived. In the early years, Channel 5 was the first to broadcast Maverick games live, and our sports crews were on hand when the Mavericks first qualified for the NBA playoffs and finally made it to the Western Conference Final. Our coverage of collegiate sports at Channel 5 dates back a full 40 years, so long ago that even our call letters are a little out of date. As for our favorite play of all time, at least the strangest, Cotton Bowl, 1954. Dickie Magle about to score when number 42, Tommy Lewis, jumped right off the bench and made the tackle in the Rice-Alabama game on New Year's Day. We've also captured future Hall of Famers in the infancy of their careers, like Forrest Gregg as a member of the SMU varsity, long before he ever became a member of Lombardi's Packers in the NFL, and how ironic that now, close to 35 years later, he's calling the shots as the Mustangs head coach. Gregg was also a former teammate of another sports magnate, Lamar Hunt, football owner and the man responsible for World Championship tennis, allowing us to bring you the likes of Borg, Lendl, McEnroe, Connors, and Becker annually. It was during our fourth decade of coverage that we saw the Cinderella Sidekicks capture the imagination of youngsters in North Texas by winning the World Indoor Soccer Championship. Led by Tattoo, the little guy with a big heart, the magic feet, and the penchant for giving away his jersey every time he scored. The world came to Dallas in 1984 when the Formula One circuit held its first ever Grand Prix event in Texas. But the man our cameras have watched grow up over the years hails from Fort Worth. Lone Star JR, three-time Indy champ, Johnny Rutherford. But long before Johnny jumped behind the wheel, we were on the course with Byron and Ben. Golf immortals, Byron Nelson and Ben Hogan, both from Fort Worth, each a legend in his own right. They were there when we arrived, and now 40 years later, the two are still headline news. 4 decades of sports coverage. Our cameras have sweated ringside with Fort Worth natives and world champions Curry and Cruz. Been courtside with Martina, who's called both Dallas and Fort Worth home at one time during this decade. Seen the wrestling Von Erich family weather many a storm. Covered many an event on the campus of Texas Christian University. Left the state on many occasions to help you keep tabs on your local heroes and their accomplishments. Come to think of it, we've even left the country. Gone international, like when the Cowboys traveled to England and got a slice of British life. In 40 years, our cameras have traveled over 2 million miles. We began this last decade here on Channel 5 by changing the viewing habits of sports fans on Sunday night with Sports Extra, the first expanded weekly sports wrap-up show in the Metroplex. And that's how we'll close our segment of this program. Until then, for Sports Extra, I'm Scott Murray. Good night, everybody.
Just about every city has a few notorious night spots, clubs that disappear after a few years, leaving behind legends that defy belief. These were 2 of the best, Pat Kirkwood's Cellar and Jack Ruby's Carousel.
We'd all like to be happy. Some people pursue happiness and others create it. Guess who's happiest? I'm James Pleitz.
There's a bank in Texas that's making a real splash. First Interstate Bank. No other bank offers statewide branch banking like First Interstate because you can make deposits, cash checks, do all your banking at any First Interstate branch in Texas. That means you can bank across town or across the state. So for the convenience of branch banking, come to First Interstate Bank and get statewide branch banking like no other.
5 in the first 40 years. And many spoke with our Bobby Wydant.
Some of the celebrities we've known have special ties to this area. Bob Hope is a longtime friend of SMU. The university even has a Bob Hope Theater. For many years, James Stewart has supported the Fort Worth Zoo. Stewart once received a key to the city and some real Western transportation.
One night with you.
Many of Elvis's first successes were in Texas. Presley often took time to talk with us.
What do you supposed to be, a lover or a fighter? It's just according to what the situation is, you know? I mean, sometimes you have to be both. I think it's
Been too lonely, too long, one night.
These are the images we Elvis fans prefer to remember.
Here's what I'm praying for.
Remember Beatlemania? These Fort Worth young people are watching a pay TV broadcast of the Fab Four's Washington, D.C. concert. No wonder the Beatles stopped touring 2 years later. At this movie promotion, I was a judge, and a KLIF disc jockey was the MC. With his sunglasses off, you'll recognize Irving Harrigan, better known today as KVIL's Ron Chapman. Channel 5 has always strongly supported the arts. We did a live broadcast of the opening of the new Casa Mañana. Some say Casa is the house Ruta built. Here, Ruta Lee is getting ready for her very first performance at Fort Worth's Casa Mañana.
With WBAP-TV.
In another live broadcast, opening night of the William Edrington Scott Theater. Our Frank Mills and I were the hosts.
Thank you, Frank. And now, shall we take the viewers inside?
Let's do.
I remember Gordon McRae almost put us off the air.
I don't know if you know this story or not, but a man and his wife had to go to a masquerade ball, and they didn't know what to go as. But Ben told me tonight, he said, well, the man and his wife went as a cow and a bull.
May I stop you to say that you're on television?
You're kidding.
3 weeks before he started hosting The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson granted us the only TV interview.
Well, I know you're going to have a lot of surprises for us, and I guess you prefer to keep them that way.
Well, I intend not to show up the first night. That's that'll be the first surprise.
Of course, he brought along Ed McMahon.
I've been with him 4 years. Mr. Wonderful.
Mr. Wonderful.
You're kidding. You're kidding.
Jane Fonda was just another starlet with the famous father when she came to promote her first movie.
We did all our love scenes in 1 week, and I decided then and there that I love movies simply because you could be paid for making love, and this was, to me, a marvelous idea. But I have yet to play love scenes with older men. I'm sure that'll be even better.
Comedy great Jimmy Durante appeared on our Dateline show to introduce his recording of Maine. To Jimmy Durante and all our celebrities, we borrow Bob Hope's favorite line, thanks for the memory.
In November 1958, a capacity crowd poured into the Will Rogers Coliseum to hear a concert by the winner of the first international Tchaikovsky piano competition in Moscow. The Metroplex turned out in force for Van Cliburn, the 23-year-old piano prodigy from Kilgore, Texas.
We've seen in the past 40 years. Throughout it all, Channel 5 has been showing viewers things that came with that certain gee whiz kind of excitement. Tim Smith says many of those items are things we now take for granted.
Ah, yes, the 50s. It was a time when many of the products, gadgets, and ideas we now take for granted were in their infancy. That, of course, includes television in its primitive state. But even then, enterprising businessmen were looking for ways to cash in. The first cable TV system in Texas was offered in Mineral Wells in 1951 in an effort to improve reception. It was really a community antenna system offered for just $3 a month, but the hookup fee was a whopping $95, big bucks in 1951 and now. We saw and reported on other new high-tech gadgets in the early 50s, including this primitive microwave oven first shown off in 1951 in Fort Worth. It was pure novelty then. Hardly anyone ever realized they'd be in the majority of homes less than 40 years later. Something like this seemed to make more sense. The idea of an ice cube maker inside the refrigerator was a big deal in 1953 at the home show at Will Rogers Coliseum. As the 50s marched on, Channel 5 showed its viewers other high-tech marvels that were just in their infancy. Even back in 1955, Texas Instruments was showing off transistors, what they could do, and the large vacuum tubes they could replace and did. But even in 1957, it seemed like these computer things might pan out. It was more like data processing, lots of punch cards flying about. Most of us didn't know why then, but we knew it was fast. Data was stored on something called a magnetic drum. We've come a long way since then. That statement might also include our music. This 1959 recording session by Ted Weems and his orchestra at a Fort Worth studio is thought to be the first stereo recording produced in the Southwest. Transportation, our cars and roads, is always of interest. It was back in 1951, too. That's when Sears Roebuck introduced its mail-order car, the Allstate, which was really a version of the old Henry J made by Kaiser Frazier. Apparently nobody liked buying a car through a department store, and it was dropped in 1953. Dallas did have a Ford plant, though. In 1957, we showed the 2 millionth car rolling off the assembly line on East Grand. The plant had opened with Model Ts in the mid-20s. It stopped producing autos in 1970. Offbeat cars got our attention in the 50s as well. Foreign models like the Volkswagen were hot, but the definitely unusual Isetta and Messerschmitt cars were little more than novelties. They cost less than $2,000 when we reported on them in 1957, but quickly disappeared from the market. They certainly would have made a slow-moving target for some police radar, though. It was 1953 when local officers got their first look at a device that would later become common. This early version was primitive, to say the least. And as many of us know, so is Central Expressway. But when a major section opened to the public in spring of 1953, it looked pretty impressive. Traffic, what there was, actually moved along quite nicely. The same could be said of the Stemmons Freeway. We reported on a 3-day celebration when it opened in 1959. Even then, one portion of the road had 16 lanes, one of the widest at the time. Some other transportation milestones you may remember. Back in 1954, somebody got the idea of trying red stop signs instead of the then traditional yellow ones. The idea stuck, but not this. In 1956, Dallas said goodbye to 84 years of streetcar service. People jammed on board to make the final run. Buses took over most routes and were said to be faster and more reliable. Remember gas wars? Those were the days when scrambling for gas money was almost a pleasure. 1954 was especially so. Prices in Fort Worth tumbled to 17 cents for regular, 19 cents for premium, or ethyl as it was called then.
Everyone is playing with the hula hoop.
Fads were big in the 50s, and none was bigger than the hula hoop. Local theaters held contests, and all sorts of folks showed up. Naturally, the kids were great at it. Adults who tried wished they hadn't. This was 1958. The next year's fad was car stuffing. TCU and SMU went head-to-head that summer. They always seemed to use Renault Dauphines. We called them Renaults back then. By the way, TCU won, somehow getting 42 people into the little car. A fitting end to the fun of the 50s. After that, of course, came the 60s, and we all got very serious.
Beauty queens have always been big news in North Texas. This young lady, one of many title holders to be featured on the Texas News, was overwhelmed by it all. Not so this cool lady who visited Six Flags as America's Junior Miss of 1963. She went on to become a CBS News correspondent. You know her today is Diane Sawyer. And speaking of beauties entering the news business, this Miss America of 1967 later became a Channel 5 News anchor. More about Jane Giroux in a moment.
A lot of careers spent here, and even more people who have passed through the Channel 5 portals while building their careers. Jack Halsell takes a look at some of the most famous former employees and where they are now.
It both amazes and amuses me that wherever I travel in North Texas, I always seem to run into someone else who once worked for Channel 5. Like SMU, TCU, or other area educational institutions, TVU here has amassed quite an alumni association in the past 40 years. Here now are just a few of the more celebrated graduates. In 1967, the pomp and circumstance for Oklahoma native Jane Giroux was in Atlantic City, where she was crowned Miss America. Her chosen career in TV news brought her here to Channel 5 in 1980, where she co-anchored for 4 years. The station still gets inquiries about Jane, the hometown girl who chose to return home. Jane currently co-anchors the news on another Channel 5 in Oklahoma City.
Even so, it's nice to be remembered by many of you. Believe me, my time in Texas is very important to my memory bank and my heart.
The same year Jane was reigning as Miss America, TCU graduate Bob Schaefer came to work for Channel 5 News. He already was a veteran journalist when the station hired him, but admits he knew nothing about TV.
And the way it happened was I was working for the Star Telegram in 1965 and went to Vietnam.
to cover the war for the Star-Telegram. And when I came back, Bobby Wygant out at Channel 5 called and asked me to come and be on a talk show and talk about the war. And so I did, and after being on the show, the station offered me a job. And it was $20 a week more than I made at the newspaper, so I took it. And that's how I came to Channel 5. I've always said I got into television for the money. $20 a week was a lot to me in those days.
The Star-Telegram sent Channel 5 and others Star alumnus. In 1953, he already was a big man on campus at North Texas State University in Denton. But like most college students, in need of cash.
Shirley and I married, expecting our first child. So I came into the Fort Worth Star-Telegram circulation office and asked if I could get a paper route. And the guy sort of chuckled benignly, said, you know, there's a lot of colleges around here, a lot of kids want paper routes. He said, it's not likely. He said, what else do you do?
When it was learned that Pat Boone sang a little, he was sent over here, warmly welcomed, and asked to name his own price to do a couple of weekend TV shows and poetry reading on radio.
So I thought just frantically, I said, well, I think I need $50 a week at least. He says, you got it. And I could have said $250, he'd have said, you got it. But I was thinking of the absolute barest minimum.
So that's, of course, what they gave you.
That's exactly what I got, and that's all I ever got.
As host of the 1989 Easter Seals Telethon, Boone helped raise more than $37 million for the charity. His successful career in records, movies, and TV spans 35 years. His squeaky clean image has matched his trademark, white buck shoes. They also made their TV debut right here on Channel 5.
Really, the white bucks were the only decent pair of shoes I had. They were white. I kept them clean. They went with anything. Oddly enough, I saw some footage of Elvis on his first television appearance. He was wearing white bucks, but they were all scuffed up and dirty. His pants were hanging down over him, and plus nobody was looking at his feet.
We invited Boone back to his video alma mater recently.
The first big shock to me is the realization that it has been 35 years.
His next big surprise was how the building had changed as he looked for the studio where he once worked weekends.
You go through here. We can go back this way and...
But we just overshot it.
I remember all. Oh, yeah.
This was probably part of the old studio.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not far off.
It seems like a homecoming to me.
Now, this must be original.
So you're back home.
I look back now in awe that that a door was opened here, that people miraculously accepted this 20-year-old kid and gave me a chance to get some experience.
You know what your memory does. This seems smaller than it did then. But for me, from Nashville, Tennessee, 20 years old, this seemed mammoth.
But I am impressed with what this station had then. I mean, it was the biggest station then. It was the most important station in the whole Southwest. I mean, it was the greatest schooling and preparation I could possibly have. So it was amazing, and I'm grateful for it.
But what would a homecoming be without home movies? Return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear.
The ghost of TV past.
Dressed as a soda jerk for the dairy sponsor.
Doing my foremost commercials, ad-lib.
All for $50 a week before taxes.
Yeah, $44.50 take home, plus I got to take home all the ice cream and milk left over from the commercials. And I would zoom back up to Denton before it spoiled.
Such sacrifice builds character on any campus. And such memories shared are what make most class reunions or homecomings worth the effort.
And thank you for being a guest at our anniversary party.
After all, you, the viewer, have been the most important part of Channel 5's existence for the past 4 decades.
With any luck, we'll do this again, and we won't wait another 40 years.
We hope you'll be watching.